6.5 years, and with no phone calls, no visits. They say his mama said she ain't seen them since like since they been in there.
New footage of YNW Melly in jail goes viral. After nearly 2,500 days behind bars without a conviction, new footage has surfaced showing YNW Melly inside Broward County Jail. But what's happening in that footage and why it's going viral right now is about to change everything you thought you knew about this case. The case that refuses to die. Let me take you back to the early morning hours of October 26, 2018. Picture this scene in your mind. A gray Jeep Compass tears through the darkened streets of South Florida, carrying 4 members of the YNW Collective, a tight-knit group of young rappers from the small, economically challenged town of Gifford, Florida, who were chasing that SoundCloud dream together, building something from absolutely nothing. Inside that vehicle were Jamel Maurice Demons, better known to the world as YNW Melly, his close associate Cortland Henry, who goes by YNW Bortland, and 2 of their childhood friends, Anthony Williams, known as YNW Sack Chaser, and Christopher Thomas Jr., known as YNW Juvie. These 4 young men had grown up together, struggled together, and were finally starting to taste success together. By the time the sun rose over the Florida horizon, 2 of those young men would be dead, their bodies riddled with bullets, their dreams extinguished forever. Now, according to the prosecution's theory of what transpired that fateful night, what happened next was nothing short of calculated, cold-blooded betrayal of the most devastating kind imaginable. They allege that Melly, sitting in the rear driver's side seat of that Jeep, opened fire on his own friends, his brothers from the same small Florida town who had built this music collective together from nothing but shared talent and shared dreams.
On October 26th of 2018, this defendant shot and killed 2 of his friends. He killed Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams.
But here's where the story takes its most disturbing and twisted turn. According to prosecutors, after allegedly committing these brutal murders, Melly and Bortland didn't call 911 immediately. They didn't rush to get help for their wounded friends. They didn't panic or cry out in horror. Instead, they allegedly staged the entire gruesome scene to look like a random drive-by shooting. The prosecution claims they drove the bullet-riddled vehicle to a desolate, isolated area near the Everglades, a dead-end road near a recycling facility where there were no streetlights illuminating the darkness, no witnesses to observe their actions, nothing but the pitch-black emptiness of the Florida night, and fired additional shots into the car from the outside to make it appear as though unknown assailants had attacked them in a random act of violence.
The car is traveling westbound on Memorial Parkway, then goes north on 172nd and shows up at the hospital for the drive-by is completely and utterly false. How can I tell you that, ladies? Well, the detectives from Miramar at this point shut down the entire length of Miramar Parkway from 160th to 172nd. And they sit and they walk side by side for an hour, that mile-long stretch, looking for evidence of this drive-by.
When Bortland finally showed up at Memorial Miramar Hospital at precisely 4:35 a.m. that morning, he told police officers a harrowing story about a random drive-by shooting that had targeted their vehicle without warning or provocation. But the seasoned investigators on the scene weren't buying his account for even a single moment. They searched the entire stretch of Miramar Parkway where this alleged drive-by supposedly occurred, walking methodically side by side for over an hour, combing every inch of that mile-long stretch of road. They found absolutely nothing. No shell casings scattered on the pavement, no glass fragments from shattered windows, no projectiles embedded in nearby structures, no tire marks from a fleeing vehicle.
There is a lack of any evidence whatsoever to support that a drive-by happened on Miramar Parkway. What would they look for? Shell casings, glass fragments, projectiles, tire marks. You're going to hear that there is none of that found whatsoever.
And when investigators finally obtained surveillance footage from the recording studio the group had left that night, they discovered something that completely and utterly contradicted the drive-by narrative Bortland had presented. There weren't just 2 people in that Jeep when it left the studio. There were 4, and Jamel Demons was clearly visible sitting in the rear driver's side seat. Now let's talk about what the forensic evidence allegedly revealed when medical examiners conducted their detailed analysis. The medical examiners determined that the fatal wounds to both victims came from inside the vehicle vehicle, originating from the rear driver's side passenger seat, traveling outward toward the passenger side where the victims were seated. Even more disturbing and damning, they found evidence of stippling on one of the victims, unburnt gunpowder residue that only appears when a firearm is discharged at extremely close range, typically within just a few feet.
The medical examiner's office is going to tell you is that when the drive-by was staged at 4:02 a.m., the victims were already dead. The medical examiner will be able to testify and tell you that the fatal shots to Anthony Williams, to his head, that enters in the back of his head and exits at the top, blowing out the front passenger window, was fatal. And that the additional wounds that are consistent with the trajectories going through the vehicle, he's already dead.
The prosecution also presented what they claimed was essentially a confession to the crime. In the hours immediately following the shooting, someone reached out to Melly on Instagram asking if he was okay after hearing about the violent incident that had occurred. According to prosecutors, Melly responded with 3 chilling, incriminating words. "I did that."
This is where context matters. What does that mean? If you work at Google and you say, "My whole floor is coding," that's a good thing. If you work at Broward General Hospital and you say, "My whole floor is coding," that is a bad thing. The context around the messages matters.
But here's where the case becomes infinitely more complicated and far less straightforward than the prosecution would have you believe. Despite all of this seemingly damning evidence, despite the forensics, despite the cell phone tracking data, despite the alleged confession, Melly's first trial in 2023 ended in a hung jury, with reports suggesting the split was 9-3 in favor of acquittal on the top charges. Think about that remarkable fact for a moment. The prosecution presented their entire case to that jury, laid out all the cell phone tracking data, all the forensic evidence, the alleged confession, and still, a significant majority of those jurors weren't convinced of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And so Melly remains trapped in a legal limbo that has stretched on for years upon years. As of now, he has been incarcerated for over 2,400 days, that's nearly 7 years, without a single conviction. His retrial, which was supposed to happen in September 2025, has been pushed back to January 2027 amid ongoing appeals over evidence admissibility.
So Mr. Dimmons has been waiting in custody to see a trial on this case since, I believe, 2019. He obviously went to trial before, that ended in a mistrial, and he's remained in custody since that, and he has a right to a speedy trial, a constitutional right to a speedy trial.
And just when it seemed like this already dramatic case couldn't possibly get any more dramatic or complicated, everything changed in September 2025 with a decision that shocked absolutely everyone. The plea deal that shocked everyone. September 9th, 2025. Mark that date in your memory. The day before YNW Bortland was scheduled to begin jury selection for his own murder trial, a trial that would determine whether he would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, he walked into that Broward County courtroom and did something that sent absolute shockwaves through the hip-hop community and the legal world alike. He took a deal.
If you wake up tomorrow or the next day and you decide you've changed your mind and you want to resolve this case, both cases, by way of a jury trial, that's not going to happen. If you want to have a trial, the trial starts tomorrow. If you want to accept the deal, you can accept the deal today. But there's not going to be any violence or remorse.
Now let me put this stunning development into proper perspective for you so you can fully understand the magnitude of what occurred. Before this plea deal was offered and accepted, Cortland Henry was staring down the barrel of multiple consecutive life sentences. We're talking life in Florida State Prison, followed by life, followed by life, followed by life, followed by another 75 years on top of all that. The man was looking at spending literally every remaining day of his existence behind bars if that jury convicted him. But with the stroke of a pen and a few words spoken in that courtroom, all of that terrifying future changed completely. The murder charges, both counts of first-degree murder with a firearm, were dropped entirely, dismissed, gone forever. In exchange for giving up his right to trial, Bortland pleaded no contest to 2 counts of accessory after the fact to murder and 1 count of witness tampering. His sentence, 10 years in prison, followed by 6 years of supervised probation, with credit for all the time he'd already served behind bars. Given that he'd been locked up for approximately 4.5 years already, he could potentially be looking at release sometime around 2032, a far cry from dying in prison.
Mr. Henry, I'm not quite sure how your lawyers managed to do this, but I wish you good luck, sir.
Even the judge presiding over the case seemed genuinely surprised and perhaps somewhat impressed by the outcome of these negotiations. Those words he spoke directly to Bortlen after accepting the plea tell you absolutely everything you need to know about how unusual and unexpected this particular deal truly was. But here's where things get really interesting and really controversial in the court of public opinion. Part of this plea agreement includes something called a proffer. This is essentially a formal interview session where Bortlen must sit down with prosecutors and provide them with a sworn statement about what actually happened that night in October 2018. Now, the immediate burning question on absolutely everyone's mind was painfully obvious. Is Bortlen going to snitch on Melly? Is he going to provide testimony that could seal his former friend's fate?
Through this proffer agreement, of course, the prosecution wants him to cooperate, but there's no negative sanction for him if he does not. There's not a positive that he will receive if he provides certain information, and there's not a negative that he would receive if he doesn't cooperate or if he doesn't give any additional information. I think considering the possible lifestyle that he lives, and of course we're in a no snitching environment with certain demographics, that he probably will not say much of anything at all.
Bortlen's attorneys have been absolutely emphatic and crystal clear about this particular point in all their public statements. They've stated publicly that there is no requirement or expectation whatsoever that he cooperate with the prosecution against his co-defendant Melly. The proffer, according to his legal team, will essentially amount to answering just a couple of basic questions about his own limited role in the events. Nothing more substantial than that.
There was a whole list of everything that would happen with the plea. What charges would get dropped, he would get credit for, what would be a null process, which is just, it's getting taken away. Nothing in it said anything about cooperating. It was just him admitting to what he did, and he would get the 16 years, and that'd be it.
But not everyone in the public sphere is convinced by these assurances. The hip-hop community immediately erupted with heated debate and passionate arguments on both sides. Some observers labeled Bortlen a snitch before he'd even sat down for the proffer interview. Others argued more reasonably that taking a plea deal to save yourself from spending the rest of your life in prison doesn't automatically make you a rat or a traitor, especially if the plea agreement explicitly doesn't require any testimony against your co-defendant.
Speaking of trials, YNW Bortlen, he just took the plea for 10 years.
Good.
6 years probation.
Cause they offered him 5 life sentences.
Yeah.
He been in there 5 years.
He's been in there 4.5.
And they know they done it.
But it's not a lot of evidence.
One perspective that cuts particularly deep came from a more controversial and outspoken voice, who saw the plea deal as clear evidence of guilt rather than simply a strategic legal move to avoid risk. The prosecution, for their part, has framed the reasoning behind the plea deal quite differently. They cited insufficient evidence to prove that Bortlen was actually a principal actor in the actual shootings themselves, essentially acknowledging publicly that while they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was involved in staging the cover-up afterward, they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he pulled the trigger or was directly responsible for causing the deaths of those 2 young men.
Yep, it's a total sweetheart deal. He was looking at multiple life sentences on the back end and essentially spending the rest of his life in prison. With this plea agreement, he pled no contest, I believe, to 2 counts, and the sentence promises 10 years.
But what about the intriguing theory that Bortlen and Melly might have actually communicated with each other before the plea was officially accepted? Some legal analysts and court observers have suggested it's entirely possible, even likely, that the 2 defendants discussed this momentous decision beforehand.
There are conversations between co-defendants, particularly people who are friends and people who have engaged or alleged to have engaged in certain conduct together, that's like, you're not going to snitch on me, I'm not going to snitch on you. At the end of the day, if that were to be the case, there's mutually assured destruction.
The implications for Melly's upcoming case remain to be seen and are the subject of intense speculation. His attorneys have already filed motions to replace his legal team entirely, citing irreconcilable conflicts that emerged in the immediate wake of Bortlen's surprise plea deal, and the retrial, now pushed all the way back to January 2027, looms like a dark storm cloud over everything.
Well, yeah, speaking of Florida, YNW Melly is delayed until 2027.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with Melly. I always still stand like you shouldn't be involved. Like, you shouldn't be involved. Your name shouldn't come up if you killing your homie. Like, it should never happen in the real.
And through all of this legal maneuvering and public speculation, Melly remains exactly where he's been for nearly 7 long years, locked inside Broward County Jail, waiting and waiting for a trial that keeps getting pushed further and further into the uncertain future. what the new footage reveals, which brings us directly to the viral footage that has absolutely everyone talking right now. After spending nearly 2,500 consecutive days incarcerated without a conviction, YNW Melly has reportedly been held under extremely restrictive and harsh conditions. According to emotional statements from his mother, Jamie Demons King, he's been subjected to prolonged periods of 24-hour lockdown, stripped of all phone privileges that would allow him to communicate with loved ones, and unable to receive visits from family members who desperately want to see him.
6.5 years, and with no phone calls, no visits. They say his mama said she ain't seen him since like since they been in there, damn near. She ain't seen him. She said she talked to him on the phone a couple of times, but they took all his phone privileges, so he in that down bad.
This is a young man who, at the absolute height of his burgeoning career, was collaborating with none other than Kanye West himself, watching his songs rack up hundreds of millions of streams across all platforms, and being hailed by critics and fans alike as one of the most innovative and unique voices in the melodic rap genre. His breakthrough track, Murder on My Mind, released months before the alleged killings ever occurred, had become a viral sensation, its haunting and eerily prophetic lyrics about accidental violence taking on a chilling new meaning in light of the devastating accusations against him. The case against Melly has always been built largely on circumstantial evidence rather than direct eyewitness testimony or irrefutable physical proof. Yes, there's the cell phone data placing him at the scene during the relevant time frame. Yes, there are the forensic analyses strongly suggesting the fatal shots came from inside the vehicle rather than from an outside assailant. Yes, there's that alleged Instagram confession that prosecutors have highlighted repeatedly. But there's also what's conspicuously missing from the prosecution's case. No murder weapon was ever recovered, despite exhaustive and extensive searches of canals, apartments, storage units, and countless other locations. No gunpowder residue was found on Melly's hands or clothing when he was tested. And crucially, and perhaps most importantly, no eyewitness has ever come forward to testify to seeing him actually pull the trigger. Then, there's the remarkable and contentious testimony from Felicia Holmes, the mother of Melly's ex-girlfriend Mariah Hamilton, who was reluctantly called to testify about a phone call she allegedly overheard on the morning of the shootings.
How are you today?
Not good.
Are you cold?
No, I'm just, I don't feel comfortable.
Are you nervous?
I feel threatened.
That single powerful word, threatened, set the confrontational tone for one of the most contentious and dramatic testimonies of the entire trial. Holmes, who seemed extremely reluctant and uncomfortable from the very moment she took the witness stand, repeatedly claimed she couldn't remember crucial details from her 2018 statement to police investigators.
Did you have an opportunity to read the statement you gave in 2018?
I read the statement,
Okay.
but I don't remember anything from that statement, but I do remember my deposition from December 22.
So the deposition, that would have been 6 months ago?
Yeah.
The prosecution pressed her aggressively on this memory issue, trying desperately to get her to confirm specific details about that early morning FaceTime call where she allegedly saw Melly on the phone screen discussing a shooting with her daughter. But Holmes pushed back firmly against this pressure, eventually revealing what she claimed was the true source of her extreme discomfort on that witness stand.
When you first took the stand, you said, "I feel threatened."
Yes, sir, I do.
Who do you feel threatened by?
Objection, Your Honor.
Christine Bradley, the prosecutor's office.
This prosecutor.
Yes, I do.
Now, whether you believe Holmes' testimony was genuinely affected by legitimate fear of prosecution by the state, or whether you believe she was simply trying to avoid providing incriminating information that could harm Melly, one thing is absolutely clear. The case against Melly is far from straightforward or guaranteed to result in conviction. And this is precisely why the new footage of Melly circulating from inside the jail has struck such a powerful nerve with the public. Here is a young man, he was just 19 years old, barely an adult when he was first arrested, who has now spent the better part of his entire 20s behind bars waiting for a legal resolution that keeps getting pushed further and further away into the uncertain future. The profound questions that this footage raises go far beyond mere curiosity about a celebrity defendant's living conditions. They cut directly to the heart of fundamental issues embedded within our criminal justice system. How long can someone legally be held in jail before trial without violating their constitutional rights to due process? At what point does pretrial detention effectively become punishment without an actual conviction?
Now we're getting into speedy trial waters. Melly has been sitting in jail for quite some time, for years at this point, on these charges. Within the United States and our constitutional framework, a person has the right to a speedy trial. So at what point does the rubber meet the road and the judge say, hey, you know, if this case isn't brought to trial by this date at this time, then I'm going to entertain a speedy trial motion to dismiss.
In October 2025, an appeals court upheld the suppression of broad digital evidence in the case, limiting what prosecutors can actually use at trial to communications from the day of and immediately after the murders occurred. This ruling was framed as a significant procedural victory for the defense team, potentially weakening the prosecution's ability to establish premeditation and motive. Then, in November 2025, the witness tampering charges against Melly were dropped entirely, reportedly due to evidentiary issues that made successful prosecution unlikely. These were extremely serious charges that had been levied back in October 2023, alleging that Melly had orchestrated sophisticated efforts from his jail cell to intimidate witnesses who might testify against him. The prosecution maintains its confidence in the overall strength of their case despite these setbacks. They continue to point to the cell phone evidence, the forensic trajectory analysis of the bullets, and the alleged confession as powerful proof of guilt. They argue that justice for Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr., two young men whose promising lives were violently cut short at just 21 and 19 years old, demands that this case be seen through to its ultimate conclusion, regardless of how long it takes.
That is important, and you know, this is a homicide case, this is a high stakes case. You want to ensure that there is integrity in the prosecution of this case because this family does deserve justice, and there isn't a person that deserves to be wrongfully convicted or in prison for something that they didn't do. So it's really important on both ends to ensure that this prosecution is done with integrity.
But the defense sees things through an entirely different lens. They point to the exact same evidence and see glaring gaps, holes in the prosecution's narrative that a jury of Melly's peers, during his first trial, apparently found significant enough to prevent them from reaching a unanimous guilty verdict.
I think that if they did it, they would have been found guilty a long time ago. I've never seen a case take this long.
Well, right, because Melly took it to court and it was a hung jury.
Right.
And they're retrying him.
And so we wait. We wait for January 2027, when Melly will once again face a jury of his peers who will decide his fate. We wait to see what, if anything, emerges from Bortland's proffer session with prosecutors. We wait to see if more evidence will be suppressed by the courts, or if new evidence will somehow emerge to strengthen one side's case. In the meantime, that footage of YNW Melly continues to circulate through social media platforms. A stark and sobering reminder that behind all the legal arguments and dramatic courtroom proceedings, there's a human being whose entire fate hangs precariously in the balance, along with the grieving families of two other young men who will never come home to their loved ones. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.